It's another magnificent day, and last night God did what I think he should do. He's caused it to rain and be sunny in the day. Is that right? Do you think I should move my board over a little away from that?
I can move it in case this is the problem, but I'm not sure.
Thank you. Thank you. In 2 Corinthians 4 verse 6, the Bible says, "For God, who commanded the light to shine forth in darkness, has shined in our hearts, to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Now we have this treasure." What's the treasure? The light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Now we have this treasure. Have you ever noticed the next bit? We have this treasure in earthen vessels. We have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of ourselves. And Titus said, "You're a good drawer." Do you know what it says in 1 Corinthians 4 verse 7? "Who made thee to differ from another? And what dost thou have that thou did not receive? And if thou did receive it, why dost thou glory as if thou did not receive it?" Praise God for the gifts that he has given us, yeah? And the only time the gifts do not develop, or the only times the gifts can fade, is if we do not develop it. Is that right? Do you know, I'm very, very shy. And when I married Michael 19 years ago, after 1 year, he said, "I want to start my own health retreat." He'd already started a few. Now, we had a lot of children, and the boys were going to be the gardeners, and his daughter would be the secretary. She was 12.
I'm going to interrupt you.
We could just go. Oh, here we are. I've got voice.
Okay.
So,
Go ahead, Barbara.
so when we married,
You're not getting the volume
19 years.
enough for recording. They aren't hearing in the back. I'm sorry.
1, 2, 3. So when Michael and I married 19 years ago, he had 2 children and I had 6 children. He had 2 children, I had 6 children. And here were the ages when we got married: 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 19, 21. Exciting stuff. And the 3 younger boys were the gardeners in our new health retreat. And his daughter, Michaela, was probably 12. She was his secretary, and she could type very well. And my daughter, Julie, was 15. She was our cook. And my other daughter, Jessica, was 17, and she was our massage therapist. So we had a team. My 2 elder children were already off and working. And I said to Michael, "Who will be the health director?" He said, "You will be." I said, "Oh, no, I'm just a mother who has helped other mothers." He said, "You'll be good," and he walked out of the room. And I was so shy that when the guests first came, he would talk, because he is not shy. But I noticed something. He just smiles at everyone, so I just smiled at everyone. And my first lectures were quiet. My first lectures were very simple. And never in a million years would I dream I would be doing this. And I'm not shaking, just a little maybe, because I know you are not interested in me. You're interested in the message that God has given me to give to you today. And in 1 Corinthians 3 verse 16, the Bible says, "Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are." And as my first verse showed, or my first selection, was we have this treasure in earthen vessels. How important to look after our earthen vessels. "If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy." That's this earthen vessel. Oh, brothers and sisters, how careful we have to be with this earthen vessel. I'm interested in a long life, but I'm not just interested in a long life, I'm interested in quality of life as well. I want a body that moves. And sometimes I forget I'm 62 because I can really do everything that I did do at 20. And some say, oh, it's in your genes. Sorry. It's hard work. So early this morning, I was running up and down all those steps that go down to the lake. I was with my daughter. We kept doing interval training, running up and down, and we got so hot, we looked at the creek. Oh, it's not a creek, it's a lake, yeah? We nodded, we went through the gate, and we just dived in. Oh, dear, that was good. Then we had to walk all the way back in our wet, dripping clothes. But it's all right, we had wool. Remember yesterday I told you about woolly jumpers? They were very thin, and you don't get cold in them. But one area that many people defile their body with is their gastrointestinal tract. The gastrointestinal tract is not working well. Now, what would it be like if you didn't empty your garbage? You call it trash, is that right? We call it a garbage bin, yeah? If you didn't empty your trash, your garbage, out of the kitchen every day, the kitchen would start smelling quite bad, yeah? Now, our breath shouldn't really smell like flowers, but it also shouldn't smell really bad. Part of being your own doctor is listening to the body and also knowing how to interpret the different signs and symptoms. And I'm going to take you on a journey, as I promised this morning, through your gastrointestinal tract. The gastrointestinal tract is a very interesting part of the body because it's not part of the body. It's a hollow tube. And everything that goes into that hollow tube is not part of you or me until it gets broken down to tiny substances, then absorbed into the blood, then it becomes part of you and me. So I have drawn my gastrointestinal tract here on the board. And I'm going to show you what happens at every stage. So the first one we're going to look at is mouth. Mouth is very interesting because it is an alkaline environment. And there's only one food, or one main food, that's broken down in the mouth, and that is the starch. So starch would be, Dan, it's interesting, you call it biscuits and gravy. In Australia, biscuits are what you call cookies. So when we think of biscuit and gravies, we think that wouldn't be very nice. Imagine cookies and gravy. So breakfast this morning, you would have had, say, biscuits, you would have had oatmeal. They're all the starches, the breads, the cereals, the pastas, they're the starches. And they break down in an alkaline environment, which is what the mouth is. And the enzyme in the mouth that breaks down the starch is ptyalin. Now, tomorrow morning at this time, I'll be talking about child nutrition. And it's an excellent meeting for everyone to hear because we were all children once, and it can actually explain why a lot of the things are happening in our bodies today because of what happened when we were children. And the ptyalin in the mouth that breaks down the starch is not released until the molars appear. Now, the molars are your grinders. And what do molars grind? They grind grain. So no grain can be broken down in the mouth till the molars appear. And I'll be explaining that in more detail on child nutrition tomorrow. So that's what happens in the mouth. There is one more, and that is the saturated fat. Now, the saturated fat that I would eat, and as vegetarians we would eat, would be coconut, yeah? Now, underneath the tongue, there are glands called sublingual glands, and they release lingual lipase. And lingual lipase breaks down short and medium chain fatty acids, which is what you will find in saturated fats. On Wednesday afternoon, I'm going to be giving a whole lecture on fats, and I'm going to show you there are some excellent fats and there are some not so good fats. And unfortunately, almost all fats have been put in the same parcel because there are some fats that are dangerous. But the saturated fat in coconut is an excellent fat. Is that a surprise? Look what it did to the South Pacific Islanders. When Captain Cook arrived in those areas, he was confronted with the most magnificent specimens of humanity he had ever met. And what did they eat every single meal? The coconut. So the coconut is an unusual fat because it has short and medium chain fatty acids, and its breakdown begins in the mouth. Now let's come down to stomach. stomach is an acid environment. On Wednesday morning, I'm going to be giving a lecture on acid-alkaline balance in the body. There's only one part of the body that should be acid, and that is stomach. And if someone says to me, I've got a very acid stomach, I say, fantastic. Because it should be. And there's only one food that is broken down in the stomach. Now, that's a surprise to most people, and that is protein. So protein is what is broken down in the stomach. And protein is broken down. Let me show you the process. So your stomach is lined with huge big folds like this, and there are glands all around that release certain things. Now 3/4, which would be about that much, release mucus, and we've got a thick mucus lining that lines the stomach. And God made it that way because that's to protect the stomach wall from the acids. Now, way down here, in these glands here, what's released is hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen. Now, these two only really work in a very acid environment. Hydrochloric acid, if one drop were to go on your skin, it would burn a hole in your skin. Can you see why God gave us that thick mucosa wall? But in a very acid environment, these two connect and release pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. You can see why God made it that way. We see the hand of God in every part of our body. You see why God made it that way, because if there wasn't a thick mucosa wall, that pepsin, it'd be start eating away your stomach acid, your stomach wall here. Can you see that? And so they're released. Also in these glands, intrinsic factor is released. And the intrinsic factor is what causes the absorption of B12. Did you know that in organically grown root vegetables, there are good sources of B12? And what are we told? We're told it's only in animal products. Is that right? Most people with B12 deficiency, it's because the gut isn't working well. In fact, a vegetarian, actually anybody, can have no B12 coming into their diet for 30 years and not show a deficiency, because there's an enterohepatic circulation pathway from the bottom part of the small intestine up to the liver that is circulating and reusing B12. So isn't that interesting? When people are B12 deficient, it's usually because the intrinsic factor is not being released. So that's what happens in the stomach. Now, you may have heard this story. I heard this story years ago, and it's a fascinating story, and I finally got the name of the book and the author, Dr. William Bates, and Amazon found it for me in a college in Alabama, and they charged me 20 cents. And this is the story. You may have heard it. It's a fascinating story, and it changed the way the world looked at nutrition. It happened in about the late 1700s, because the book I've got was written in 1833. A young man named Alexis St. Martin in a trading store sustained a gunshot wound to the stomach, and it blew out part of his stomach and part of his ribs. He was only 18 at the time. Dr. William Beaumont was called. He was the attending physician. He was only 25 at the time. He looked at the young man and he said he would not live. And every day when he went and checked on him, he was reviving. He was healing. I'll tell you something very interesting about the story. Eventually, William Beaumont took him to his home so he could tend him there. 5 times a big tumour rose on the wound. Then it burst and a 2-inch piece of rib came out. Why did the body make a tumour? What an amazing body we live in. That's why we've got to learn to listen, interpret and work with it. There were 2 things Dr. William Beaumont put on his wound. Aloe. What's aloe? Aloe vera. That's a wonderful herb for the lining of this gut, because it's all slimy. And guess what the lining of your gut is like? Slimy. The other herb he put in was myrrh. Myrrh is a gum resin. Remember the 3 wise men gave myrrh, very valuable herb, very strong antiseptic, antimicrobial. They were the tooth. That was the only treatment that Dr. William Beaumont did to Alexis St. Martin. But as Alexis St. Martin healed, a strange thing was evident. There was a hole going straight into his stomach. It was about here. And it just stayed a hole. And Dr. William Beaumont saw his opportunity. He would get pieces of food, put them on a silk thread, and put them in the hole. Pull it out 2 hours later, look at it, put it back in the hole. Pull it out 4 hours later, put it back in the hole. And as a physician, he carefully, meticulously documented his findings. And he found that digestion took, on an average, 3 to 4 hours. The stomach has not changed. And what are many personal trainers, physicians telling people to do now? How often have they got to eat? Graze, eating every couple of hours. They say it'll raise your metabolic rate. And when people want to lose weight, that's attractive. Raise your metabolic rate. Do you know it's like a jockey on a horse in a horse race? And it's not going fast enough. So what does he do? He gets the whip out and he starts whipping the horse. Does the horse go faster? Oh yes, it's being whipped. Do you know that's what people do when they're putting food in their stomach every couple of hours? They're whipping their stomach faster, faster, so their metabolic rate raises. That's not a good way to raise your metabolic rate. There's only one way to raise your metabolic rate, and that is exercise. Right? There's no other way. But as we go through this series, I'm going to show you a type of exercise that you can do in 12 minutes. 12 minutes in a 24-hour period. It's interval training. I will define it later. I must keep on track in the gastrointestinal tract. Dr. Beaumont found that there were 5 things that caused the food to be still in the stomach 8 hours later. Let's have a look at those. Overeating. Dr. Beaumont came to the conclusion that there's only so much digestive enzymes released in the stomach, and if too much food goes in, it just can't do it. Now, I don't know about in America, but in Australia, on Christmas Day, people eat a lot more food than usual. They eat larger than usual, and so no one's really interested in having tea. You call it supper, yeah? We call it tea of an evening. Am I right? Because they're not hungry because too much went in, and the poor old stomach, the food can still be in there 8 hours later. The other one was often eating. Do you know, I read a book recently by Dr. Michael Mosley. You might have heard of him. He's the 5-2 diet guy. I read a book by him called Fast Diet. Excellent book. And in this Fast Diet, he's the first modern author that I have seen looking at this issue and actually showing how when you eat all day long, you don't digest your food properly and you can actually put on weight. And he's a very well-known author. So I was very excited to see that there's some modern doctors, authors coming out confirming what the Spirit of Prophecy told us a long time ago. Is that right? Big breaks between the meal. And that's why I loved this book, because his research showed the same thing. Down at the bottom of the stomach, there's a little gateway, and it's called the pyloric sphincter. And the pyloric sphincter, when you wake up in the morning, it's open. That's why having warm water in the morning, it goes straight down to the depths. And when you smell food, think food, taste food, that little pyloric sphincter shuts. And then the food comes in. And there are little sensors that come out. And that pyloric sphincter will not open until the food is broken down to a certain state. Then it'll open, and little by little the food will come in or come out. Now, what is the time now? It's past 11. Is it past 11? It's 11:30. How many people, I know in Australia, they have morning tea about 9:30, 10. What would morning tea be? A cup of tea and a biscuit, a pasty, a pie, a sandwich, Or maybe they're really healthy and it is an apple with a handful of nuts. In this case, it doesn't matter what it is. As soon as it comes in, pyloric sphincter gets the message, quick, shut the gate, something else has just come in and it's not broken down properly. And it will not open until that biscuit or apple or whatever joins here and it gets, yes, it's broken down, we can start coming through. But before it can all come through, it's midday. What goes in now? Lunch. Quick, shut the gate, something's just come in that's not broken down. Can you see what's happening? And so at the end of the day sometimes there are still remnants of breakfast in the stomach. Dr. Beaumont also found that when large fluid was taken with the meal, now I don't know if this is a habit in America, but it's certainly an Australian habit. Huge amounts of liquid are being taken with the meal. What happens in this case, Dr. Beaumont found that it waters down the acidity of the stomach, and so that it can't break down the protein. And so digestion stops, the fluid has to be all taken out, bring the acidity back to what it should be, and start digesting again. We should be drinking our water between meals. We should stop about half an hour before the meal and resume about an hour and a half after the meal. After an hour and a half, the digestion is certainly well into its process and little bits are starting to go through. The other thing was stress. If he was anxious or fearful or upset, that stopped digestion. And the last one was alcohol. These are the 5 things that happened that caused the food to be still in the stomach 8 hours later. So that's stomach. Because starch is digested in an alkaline environment, the starch digestion stops in the stomach. The saturated fat is still going through its process. But protein is the main food that's digested in the stomach. Now let's come down to the first part of the small intestine, which is the duodenum. We'll just call it a big D here. Sorry, my big D should be over here. The big D, duodenum. And this is an alkaline environment. So in the alkaline environment, in fact, it's amazing what God has done. You see this pancreas, how it's got a little avenue there into the duodenum. It releases sodium bicarbonate to ensure that any stomach acid in the food is now neutralized to maintain this alkaline environment. So let's first look at the liver. You see, under the liver is the gallbladder, and then the gallbladder has a bile duct that comes down and it connects with the neck of the pancreas. And bile has one thing that it does, it's called bile. It breaks down fats, but the fats it breaks down are our polyunsaturated fats. So they're the ones from our nuts and our seeds, things like that. But also the pancreas. The pancreas releases pancreatic lipase, and pancreatic lipase, it further breaks down the fats. Not the short and medium chain fatty acids, they don't need it. Isn't that amazing? Short and medium chain fatty acids, they get their start in the mouth. No wonder the island is called the coconut oil, the jewel of the Pacific. And science is now showing us it's a remarkable oil. Are you familiar with the books by Dr. Bruce Fife? He's got about 5 books. One's called The Miracle Oil, Coconut Cures, Oil Pulling, Stop Autism Now, Stop Alzheimer's Now. And I'll show you, when we look at fats on Wednesday afternoon, how the coconut oil is actually healing and turning around Alzheimer's and autism. Fascinating. It's an amazing oil. Okay, so this is coming from the pancreas. This one's coming from the liver. There's more from the pancreas. The pancreas releases pancreatic amylase. And pancreatic amylase is basically a ptyalin, and it does the final breakdown of the starch. There's more. Did you know that your pancreas is your main organ of digestion? What also comes out of the pancreas is trypsin. And something else, chymotrypsin, 2 different types of enzymes that break down protein. So the starch starts in the mouth and it's finished when it gets to the duodenum under the action of pancreatic amylase that comes from the pancreas. The long-chain fatty acids, which are polyunsaturated fats, they get broken down first. The starts with the bile, and then the pancreatic lipase further breaks it down. And then the protein, which was begun in the stomach, gets its final breakdown in the duodenum under the action of trypsin and chymotrypsin from the pancreas. I hope I haven't lost you. Believe me, I'm making it as simple as I can. And now we come to the grand finale. The grand finale of digestion. This small intestine, did you know that most of your food is absorbed before it gets to about halfway through your small intestine? So your small intestine is lined with villi. And do you remember yesterday I showed you how the new cell is made down here, travels up, and every 3 to 5 days, it's taken away because the cells that line your gastrointestinal tract are remade every 3 to 5 days. Now, your gastrointestinal tract is lined with a thick turf wall. It's made up of Lactobacillus acidophilus and Bifidus bacterium. In fact, there are trillions. One specialist says there's a literal jungle in there. Lactobacillus acidophilus and Bifidus bacterium, I am talking English, they're the two permanent bacteria. And when we are born, our gut is sterile. And when we come through the birth canal, we're literally showered with our mother's microbes. Now, those microbes are responsible for the final breakdown. They do the final touches on digestion. They are responsible for the absorption of our food. Do you remember what I call this? The grand finale of digestion. They're responsible not only for the final touch, the final breakdown of our foods, they're responsible for the food getting through and into the blood, because the blood's in here, and they are responsible for protecting our blood. Ladies and gentlemen, these are your border protections. I'm amazed at what I have to take off me to go through security. My boots. They wanted to take my coat off one day. I said, I can't take my coat off. It's my blouse. Whoa. Anyway, they looked a bit terrified when I said that, and they let me through. And the last thing these microbes do is they nourish. They're responsible for nourishing these little cells. Remember I said these little cells are remade every 3 to 5 days? They start here and they come up and go. And these microbes are responsible for all of that. How important that we look after our microbes. Do you know what I say to my grandchildren when they're staying? I get up in the morning and I say to them, have you watered your garden yet? And if we've got another little boy who doesn't know what I'm talking about, they look at him and go, the garden in there. So they're the microbes. This is the grand finale of digestion. I don't have we're a royal priesthood, so we'll have blue blood. So here's the blood here. And remember I said the grand finale of digestion? Remember I said the gut is a hollow tube, and anything that goes in there is not part of you or me until it gets absorbed into the blood. Now, under the action of these microbes, it comes in to the blood. The blood is the life of the flesh, the Bible says. And also, one writer called it the river of life, because it carries all our nutrients from what we're eating to the CBD. The CBD is the central business district of the human body. And this afternoon, when I look at the liver, I'm going to be looking at the liver. And the reason why I'm going to be explaining cholesterol, because your liver makes cholesterol. And it makes according to the body's needs. So we're going to be looking at the liver this afternoon. Liver lives under your right rib. It's your project manager. So everything that goes into the blood goes on the M1, I call it, main highway. M1 is one of our big highways in Australia. I realise you probably don't know that. But anyway, the main highway, which is the portal vein, straight to the liver, and then the liver determines where they go. So this afternoon, I'll tell you what happens next in that regard. But we're going to keep to our gastrointestinal tract. Can you see how important this gut flora is? We don't want that to break down, but there are things today that are causing the breakdown. Let me show you. Antibiotics break it down. Antibiotics are killer. Now, I'm not against antibiotics. They've saved millions of lives. But the human gut can only cope with about 2 in a lifetime. Got that? And as we go through this series, I'll show you the body can heal itself. I mentioned a study that was done in Australia because in Australia they got a big push to doctors to stop prescribing so many antibiotics. And the study said 100 people got the flu, 50 took antibiotics, 50 didn't, all got better. Did you hear that? What you've got to do is you've got to remember what your grandmother did. And if you're a grandmother, well, I'm a grandmother, my grandparents aren't still alive. That's why we've got to catch the old people and ask them what their mothers did, yeah? But God is very good. There are many books that describe lots of natural treatments that you can do. What also cuts off this gut flora? All your statin drugs. Cortisone. All your cortisones, knock it off. Your pain-killing drugs, knock it off. What's happening now, ladies and gentlemen? Now we've got a compromise in the final breakdown of a food. We've got a compromise in the absorption of our food. We're compromised our border protection, so things can start getting in there that should never get in there. And the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract have now lost their nourishment. That's a bit scary, isn't it? You know what Hippocrates said? All disease begins in the gut, and he didn't know what I've just shown you here. Amazing. So the million-dollar question is now, how do we repair that? I'll tell you the story of a man that came from Kenya. He was going to the toilet 10 times a day. Do you know what Dr. Kellogg said? 3 intakes a day should equal 3 evacuations a day. 10 times a day, what's his body saying to him? His body's going like this. Something's wrong. So he'd go to the doctor and he'd be put on cortisone, which cortisone just stops your body reacting. High amounts of anti-inflammatories. The man was 40. He wanted help. It just wasn't doing it anymore. He came to our health retreat. He just had a big flare-up where he'd gone back on all his medication. When he came to us, the cortisone was greatly reduced. The anti-inflammatories were still there. First 2 days at our health retreat are juices. That's every 2 hours, a fresh, mainly vegetable and a little bit of fruit juice. I thought, I wonder how he'll go. But what I did was I gave him some herbs. Do you know, God told us in Psalm 104, verse 14, that he gave us herbs for the service of man. So this is number 1. What I gave him was slippery elm. Now, as the name implies, you put water with slippery elm and it certainly goes a bit slippery. But that's exactly what we want. If you want to know what the lining of your gut looks like, pull your lip down. You see how it's sort of a bit slimy. And if you pour boiling water into it and mix it quickly, it doesn't go lumping, and then put a little bit of cold in and throw it down. If you let it sit, it'll go really thick and you'll have to eat it with a spoon. Now, one man said he likes it like that, so I'll leave it up to you. So I gave him slippery elm 4 times a day, morning, noon, evening, and just before bed. Now, slippery elm contains a growth stimulant. It stimulates rapid healing in the lining of the gut. It coats, soothes, and heals the lining of the gut. Now, there's another herb you can use, and that is aloe vera. And as I mentioned before, aloe vera is slimy too. How do you eat that? Well, you have to peel the skin off, because the yellow under the skin you never want to give to someone with diarrhea, or they'll go 20 times a day. So you just get the clear gel in the middle, or you can buy aloe vera. So I would say to people who had this problem, either one or the other. Now, this man, it can be called Crohn's disease, colitis. In fact, his specifically was called ulcerative colitis. The lining of his gut was so raw it had actually formed ulcers. So irritable bowel, Crohn's disease, colitis, gastrite, they're all very similar. And they can be in different places, but the same thing heals them all. So slippery elm aloe vera, as you can see, you take it in and it coats, soothes and heals the whole tract. Now, something that he absolutely loved, we didn't give him at Misty Mountain Health Retreat, was bread. Now, on Wednesday, I'll be talking about the hybridization of the bread. It was hybridized in the 50s, just to give it to you quickly, and that produced an incredibly complex structure, very difficult for the gut to break down. Almost only a cast iron gut can. And he lived on it morning, noon and night. So can you see that he was eating the very food that was irritating it? And the other thing that I gave him was I gave him a double dose of probiotic. Now, research also shows that the other things that are irritating are dairy products. Cow's milk is excellent milk for baby calves. And if you give a baby calf the milk that you buy in the shop, it'll die. Scary, isn't it? And refined sugar. Now, these three foods, so we're going to put a big stop beside these ones. Is that all I did? Yep, that's it. Do you know, God meant healing to be very simple, didn't he? So this man was having slippery elm 4 times a day. He was on juices. He wasn't having any of this. We're giving double dose of probiotic. Probiotic basically is Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidus bacterium in a powder form. Take it early so it goes way, way down where you want it. So by the afternoon I said, "How are you going?" He said, "Good." That's all he'd ever say. I said, "How many times are you going?" 4. That's fantastic. Because I thought if he overwent on the juices, I'd just start feeding him. So you see, I'm watching. I'm just watching. Tuesday afternoon. "How are you going?" "Good." "How many times are you going?" 4. And that's all he would ever say. So I thought by Wednesday, food comes in, that'll even slow down things a little bit more. And we don't serve any of these at our health retreat, the things I know would irritate. So I said on Wednesday morning, "How are you going?" "Good." "How many times are you going?" 4. That's all he'd ever say. So I'd have to ask a few more questions. "Has the bleeding stopped?" "Yes." She was a little embarrassed too. "Have you got any more cramping or pain?" "No." That's all he'd say. So I said by Wednesday afternoon, "It's your choice. I have no authority on your medication, but I believe that you could stop your medication." "Good." Thursday. "How are you going?" "Good." "How many times are you going?" 3. Wow. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you could not take the smile off this man's face. He comes from a culture where you don't talk about such things, so I understood. If it was you and me, we'd be jumping up and down and screaming with joy. Wow, isn't that incredible? Can you see why he responded so quickly? Because the cells that line our gastrointestinal tract are remade every 3 to 5 days. In fact, everyone that comes to me, whether it be Crohn's disease, whether it be irritable bowel, whether it be ulcerative colitis, whether it be ulcerative gastritis, do the same thing and I see the same results, without exception. I gave this lecture in New Zealand a few years ago and a lady came to me on Tuesday night. She said, "What you've told me to hear tonight, I have never heard." She was 70. She said, I've had Crohn's disease for 30 years. She was bleeding from the bowel. She had cramping and she averaged 8 times a day to the bath. You call it bathroom, we call it toilet. Thursday night, what's that, 2 days? She came to me just beaming. She said, "I am not bleeding anymore." She said, "I am going 4 times and I have no more cramping." 2 days. Isn't that incredible? 2 days. What an amazing body we live in. I will praise him, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Oh, my one desire is to awaken in each and every one of us a respect for this dust, for this earthen vessel, that we look after it. And it's so simple. It's simpler than we realize. And what does the Bible say in 1 Thessalonians 5:21? Prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. Yeah? One lady said, Barbara, you've got so many wonderful success stories. Are there any failures? The only failures are on the part of the person to do what they got to do to get the results. So that's what you do with irritable bowel. That's what you do with diarrhea. What do you do with constipation? Well, with constipation, very important to exercise every day, very important to drink adequate water. You see, one of the main functions of the colon is to take water out. So stools are formed. So when a person is dehydrated, more water gets taken out than should be taken out. And there is one way to ensure that you access the water, and that is by taking the Celtic salt. Celtic salt contains 82 minerals. Now, there is another salt that is very similar, and that is Himalayan salt. Every time you start a glass of water, put crystal of Celtic salt on your tongue and drink the water. What that water does is what that salt does is it pulls the water inside the cell. It actually is the best way to hydrate a human body. And the other way to take water is sip it all day long. Have your bottle beside you. Sip, 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 sip. Your body can access it a little better. And the other thing this colon needs, it needs to be swept every single day. What sweeps it? Fibre. What's your highest fibre food? Your highest fibre food is your vegetables. Vegetables and fruits. Now let me tell you something about there's a little muscle just here. And that little muscle we love because it prevents us from being incontinent. So we have, and that muscle, I'll write it for you because it's a very important one. It's called puborectalis. Puborectalis. And God was very good to give us puborectalis, because puborectalis, can you see, it's like a little loop and it holds the feces in this area here. And when there's a bit of pressure coming on here, we feel it in the anus, and of course we go to the bathroom. But when you sit like this, I know you think I drew a good picture there, but I'm not a great drawer, so head. When you sit like this, puborectalis sits tight. But when you squat and the legs come up like that, puborectalis loosens, and when that muscle loosens, you get a clear travel area through like that. How did Adam and Eve go to the bathroom? They squatted, and in many countries they squat. And you can buy something now I'm not asking you to go out into the bush and dig a hole. We're very civilized today. You can buy squatty potty. And squatty potty, you can put that into the web. Squatty potty is this very nicely refined contraption that sits around the toilet. So you can sit on the toilet with your feet there and your legs will go up like that. And your puborectalis will loosen and you can easily go. In fact, one lady said, now that I've got my squatty potty and I go, she said, I feel like I haven't really gone because there's just no effort. You can see why, because puborectalis opens your rectum, so clear quickly shoot through. And you know what else though it does? It prevents hemorrhoids, those nasty little things that can come down here because of pressure. And you can see why there's pressure. There can be pressure because pressure down here, because the person is constipated and too much weight is going down there, and then when they sit on the toilet, there's even more pressure on the anus. So when you squat, you loosen puborectalis, now you've got to shoot through, straight through. Oh, you can see God even in puborectalis, can't you? Such a simple thing that you can do. And this can help so much with hemorrhoids. It can help so much with constipation. And it can prevent the constipation and prevent the hemorrhoids. And if you can't afford squatty potty, you could also go to the dollar shop and get a little plastic stool and put that in front so that the legs come up. You'll get used to it. And you know, in many cultures, they still go like that to go to the bathroom. The main thing that the large intestine or the colon does is take water out, because when you come from the small to the large intestine, it's basically liquid. But this area doesn't work well when it's not going regularly. It doesn't work well if the person's dehydrated and the contents dry out a little bit, and it doesn't work well if the person's on refined food, because there's lots of little corners here that can get blocked up. In countries that are vegetarians, they've never heard of colon cancer. And in the cities, they start eating meat, refined white breads, refined sugars, then colon cancer. And apparently colorectal cancer is about number 2 killer in America. That's one figure that I saw. Whoa! And yet so easily fixed. So easily fixed. We will praise our Father in heaven because we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Know you not that your body is the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwells in you. If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. Many people are defiling their bodies because of what is sitting in their gastrointestinal tract. And remember, in Acts 17 verse 30, it says, God winks at our ignorance. If up until today you were ignorant on these things, please don't beat yourself up or give yourself a hard time. Remember, there's only one person that's the accuser of the brethren, and that is the devil. And he'll use any way to discourage you. But God is so good. He brought you here this morning to hear about your gastrointestinal tract and the simple things that you can do to bring about healing. Now, just in my last few minutes, I find many people are low in acid. In my 20 years of helping people with health, I have never met anyone that's got an over-acid stomach. And I said to one man when he said, I've got too much acid, I said, how do you know? He said, it keeps coming up. Well, that's because the gateway isn't working well. Can you see that? So if someone has reflux or they call it heartburn, the acid's coming up. Why would the acid come up? Remember, we always have to be saying why. Because the curse causeless shall not come. Well, that is a muscle, and when it's relaxed, it's closed. When it's tightened, it opens. So many people, if they're highly stressed, that muscle will open because they're stressed. And there's one mineral that will relax the muscle and close it, and it's magnesium. And the other reason why that little gateway gets so relaxed, or so loose so it opens easily, is because people eat too much at night. So when they lie down, the huge amount of food in their stomach is putting pressure on that little valve. Everyone that comes to our health retreat with reflux or heartburn goes home without it. Because we serve them breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, tea, or you call it supper, like a pauper, and I give them magnesium at every meal and just before bed. And I've had people come to me that have been on Nexium, or the equivalent, for 25 years. Is it working? If someone has to be on it for 25 years. Such simple things. Such simple things. All my lectures are on YouTube, and this one is on YouTube. In the shop, is my set of DVDs you can buy, and it has all the lectures on it, including this one. And my book is also for sale. And my book is mostly a summary of looking after the body, but a concentration really on the lecture that I gave yesterday. But I thank you for your attention this morning. I'm very impressed that you're still awake, because I know it's not easy to sit. So let us bow our heads as we close. Father in heaven, thank you so much for our gastrointestinal tract. And thank you so much that it has the ability to heal itself. And thank you so much, Father, for giving us this information this morning, that we might be better stewards of the earthen vessel we live in, that we might be better stewards and be mindful that this body is the temple of God. And may we each take steps to be mindful that it is holy and to look after it, that the King of Glory might have a better place to reside in. For we all want you there, Father. And it is my prayer today that you will hear us, for I pray it in the very precious